The millionaire beat his wife and laughed, while his 4-year-old daughter watched, shaking in fear. As he walked out, she whispered, "I'll destroy your life." 18 years later, she walked into court as a lawyer and faced her father as his worst nightmare. "Hi, my beautiful family. May the Lord bless your heart with peace, your soul with strength, and your home with endless joy. May every closed door be replaced with a better one, and may love always find you. If this is your first time here, don't scroll away. You're not just watching a story, you're stepping into a family full of love, healing, and truth. Stay, and let your heart feel at home. If my stories still touch your heart, drop a comment. Yes, I'm with my brother, Mr. Peter. Please like, comment, and share this with love. We're not just telling stories, we're building a legacy together as one beautiful family. June 1999. The courthouse smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams, but Aretha Rice had never breathed sweeter air. She sat on the wooden bench outside Family Courtroom B, her hands trembling as she smoothed the wrinkles from her best blue dress, the one George had always hated because it made her feel beautiful. 4-year-old Amber pressed against her side, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit named Coco, her dark eyes wide with the kind of understanding no child should possess. "Mama, is Daddy going to yell again?" Amber whispered, her small voice cutting through the morning silence like a prayer for peace. Aretha's heart shattered and mended simultaneously. She gathered her daughter closer, inhaling the sweet scent of Johnson's baby shampoo that still clung to Amber's carefully braided hair. "No, baby girl. Today is the day we get to be safe. Today is the day we get to be free." The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom creaked open, and Aretha's lawyer, Mrs. Patricia Henderson, emerged with a file folder thick enough to tell the story of 18 months of hell. Behind her came George Thomas, his face twisted in the familiar mask of barely controlled rage that had haunted Aretha's nightmares for years. George's expensive suit couldn't hide what he truly was, a man who believed love meant ownership, who confused fear with respect. His lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in designer heels, whispered urgently in his ear as they passed. But George's attention was fixed on Aretha with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. "This ain't over, Aretha," he hissed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You think some piece of paper is gonna protect you? You think—" "Mr. Thomas." The voice that cut through George's threat was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute authority. A young man in a charcoal grey suit stepped forward from the gallery seating, his presence somehow making the courthouse corridor feel safer. "I believe your attorney needs to speak with you." Aretha looked up to find herself staring into the kindest blue eyes she had ever seen. The stranger was tall, but not imposing, with sandy brown hair and the sort of gentle face that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. He positioned himself casually between George and Aretha, his stance protective without being aggressive. George's jaw clenched, but something in the young man's steady gaze made him step back. "Come on," George's lawyer tugged at his sleeve. "We need to discuss the custody arrangements." As George stalked away, muttering threats under his breath, Aretha found herself alone with her daughter and the mysterious protector. Amber peeked out from behind her mother's dress, studying the stranger with the careful attention she gave to everything these days. "Thank you," Aretha said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." The man's smile was warm and genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes. "I'm Caspian Whitmore. I'm sorry, I was observing today as part of my family law training. I couldn't help but notice." He gestured vaguely toward where George had been standing. "Some men never learned how to treat a lady." Caspian. The name rolled through Aretha's mind like music. She had never met anyone named Caspian before, but it seemed to fit him perfectly, strong yet gentle, distinctive yet approachable. "I'm Aretha Rice," she replied, automatically extending her hand. When he took it, his grip was firm but careful, calloused in a way that suggested he wasn't afraid of honest work. "And this is my daughter, Amber." "Hello, Miss Amber." Caspian crouched down to Amber's eye level, his voice taking on the special tone adults used when they actually liked children, not just tolerated them. "That's a very pretty rabbit you have there. What's his name?" "Coco," Amber said shyly, holding up the stuffed animal. "He keeps the monsters away." Something flickered across Caspian's face. Pain, recognition, understanding. "Coco looks like a very brave rabbit. I bet he's excellent at keeping monsters away." Mrs. Henderson appeared at Aretha's elbow, her expression a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. "Aretha, honey, we need to go back in. The judge is ready to finalize everything." Aretha's stomach churned. This was it, the moment that would determine whether she and Amber would truly be free or whether George would continue to control their lives through court-mandated visitation and shared custody. "Mrs. Rice?" Caspian stood, his expression serious. "May I walk you in?" Sometimes it helps to have a friendly face in the gallery. Aretha studied his face, searching for any sign of the ulterior motives she had learned to expect from men. But all she saw was genuine concern and a quiet strength that reminded her of her father, who had died when she was 17. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Caspian was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "My father always said that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, and sometimes—" He looked down at Amber, who was listening with the intense focus of a child who had heard too many adult conversations about her future. "Sometimes little girls need to see that there are good men in the world." The words hit Aretha like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they carried a hope she had almost forgotten how to feel. When was the last time someone had thought about what Amber needed? When was the last time a man had considered her daughter's well-being without being asked? "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." The courtroom was smaller than Aretha had expected, with fluorescent lights that cast everything in harsh relief. George sat at the defendant's table with his lawyer, his posture rigid with barely contained fury. When Aretha entered with Amber and Caspian, George's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent. Judge Margaret Sullivan was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair and the kind of no-nonsense expression that suggested she had seen everything the family court system had to offer. She reviewed the file before her with methodical precision, while the court reporter prepared her machine. "This is the matter of Rice versus Thomas, regarding the dissolution of marriage and custody of the minor child, Amber Lynn Thomas," Judge Sullivan began. "I have reviewed all documentation, including the police reports, medical records, and witness statements submitted by both parties." Aretha's hand found Amber's automatically, squeezing gently as her daughter shifted nervously in the gallery seat. Behind them, she could feel Caspian's steady presence like an anchor in a storm. "Mr. Thomas," the judge continued, "your petition for joint custody is denied. The evidence clearly demonstrates a pattern of domestic violence that creates an unsafe environment for the minor child." George shot to his feet. "That's bullshit. Your Honor, my wife is lying. She's trying to turn my daughter against me." "Mr. Thomas, you will sit down and remain quiet, or you will be held in contempt." Judge Sullivan's voice could have frozen fire. "Mrs. Rice, you are hereby granted full physical and legal custody of Amber Lynn Thomas. Mr. Thomas, you are granted supervised visitation every other Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., contingent upon completion of a certified anger management program and random drug testing." The gavel came down with the finality of thunder, and Aretha felt something inside her chest break open, not with pain, but with relief so profound it made her dizzy. Amber was safe. They were free. George's roar of rage echoed through the courtroom as his lawyer tried to restrain him. This isn't over, Aretha! You hear me? This isn't over! But his threats felt empty now, powerless against the legal protection surrounding them like armor. Aretha gathered Amber into her arms, breathing in her daughter's sweet scent as tears of relief streamed down her cheeks. When they finally made it back to the courthouse steps, the June sun felt like a blessing on Aretha's face. Atlanta spread out before them, a city full of possibilities, a place where they could build a new life without fear. Mrs. Rice. Caspian appeared beside them, his expression gentle. "Do you need a ride anywhere? I could call you a cab or—" "We're okay," Aretha said quickly, then softened her tone. "But thank you. For everything. You didn't have to help us, but you did, and I—" She trailed off, unsure how to express what his kindness meant to someone who had forgotten that kindness existed. Caspian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "I know you have a lawyer already, but if you ever need anything, legal advice or just someone to call if he bothers you again, please don't hesitate." Aretha took the card, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. The contact sent an unexpected warmth up her arm, and she found herself looking into those kind blue eyes again. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore." "Caspian," he corrected gently, "and it was my pleasure, Mrs. Rice." As they walked away, Amber's hand secure in hers, Aretha tucked the business card carefully into her purse. She didn't know why, but something told her she would see Caspian Whitmore again. And for the first time in years, that possibility didn't frighten her. Chapter 2. New Beginnings. August 1999, the smell of jasmine and hope filled the air as Aretha Rice turned the key to apartment 2B for the very first time. 2 months had passed since the courthouse victory, and the small one-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta felt like a palace compared to the prison she had escaped. Sunlight streamed through windows that had never witnessed violence, casting golden rectangles across hardwood floors that had never been stained with tears of fear. "Mama, is this really ours?" Amber asked, her voice filled with wonder as she ran her small hands along the freshly painted walls. At 4 years old, she had learned to whisper in their old house, but here her voice could ring out like church bells. "Yes, baby girl, this is our home. Our safe place." Aretha knelt beside her daughter, pulling her into an embrace that smelled of new beginnings and Johnson's baby lotion. "No one can hurt us here." The apartment wasn't much, just one bedroom that they would share, a tiny kitchen with appliances from the 70s, and a living room barely large enough for the second-hand furniture Aretha had bought with her savings. But it was theirs, paid for with the money she earned cleaning office buildings at night and helping Mrs. Chen at Magnolia Dreams flower shop during the day. Aretha had discovered the flower shop 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, when she was walking Amber to the nearby playground and noticed the help wanted sign in the window. Mrs. Chen, a 70-year-old Chinese immigrant with arthritic hands and a heart bigger than Georgia, had taken one look at Aretha's desperate expression and hired her on the spot. "You have gentle hands," Mrs. Chen had said in her accented English, watching Aretha arrange a bouquet of yellow roses. "Flowers know when someone has suffered. They bloom better for those who understand beauty after pain." Working with flowers had become Aretha's therapy. Each morning she would arrive at the shop before dawn, preparing arrangements for weddings, funerals, and everyday celebrations. The work required patience, creativity, and a delicate touch, skills she had developed during 18 months of walking on eggshells around George's explosive temper. Today, however, her peaceful routine was interrupted by a crisis that had nothing to do with flowers. Her 1987 Honda Civic, the car that had carried her and Amber to freedom, had finally given up the ghost in the flower shop parking lot. The mechanic, a greasy man named Bob, with wandering eyes and flexible ethics, claimed the repairs would cost $800. Money Aretha simply didn't have. "Mrs. Rice, you sure you want to put that much money into this old thing?" Bob asked, leaning against the counter of his auto shop like he was doing her a favor. I got a buddy who might be interested in buying it for parts. Course it wouldn't be much, maybe $200. Aretha's heart sank. $200 wouldn't even cover a down payment on another used car, and without transportation, she couldn't get to work. Without work, she couldn't pay rent. The walls of her new freedom suddenly felt like they were closing in. That evening, as she tucked Amber into their shared bed, her daughter's innocent question broke her heart. "Mama, why are you crying?" "I'm not crying, baby girl. Mama's just tired." But Amber, wise beyond her 4 years, reached up and touched the tears on Aretha's cheek. "It's okay to cry sometimes. Coco told me so." The next morning, desperate and running out of options, Aretha remembered the business card tucked in her wallet. Caspian Whitmore had said to call if she needed legal advice, and technically, this was a legal matter. Bob's estimate seemed suspiciously high, and she had a feeling he was trying to take advantage of a single mother with no other options. Caspian's law office was located in a renovated Victorian house in the Grant Park neighborhood, painted sage green with white trim and surrounded by oak trees that had witnessed Atlanta's entire history. A small sign by the front door read, "Whitmore Family Law, protecting families, building futures." Aretha hesitated on the front porch, Amber's hand clasped tightly in hers. What if Caspian didn't remember them? What if he had only been kind in the courthouse because he felt sorry for her? What if his offer of help had been nothing more than polite courthouse courtesy? But before she could lose her nerve and turn away, the front door opened, and Caspian Whitmore appeared with a briefcase in one hand and a travel mug of coffee in the other. He was dressed more casually than he had been in court, khaki pants and a light blue button-down shirt that made his eyes look like summer sky. Mrs. Rice. His face lit up with genuine pleasure, as if running into her was the best part of his morning. What a wonderful surprise. "Hello there, Miss Amber. How's Coco doing?" Amber beamed, pulling her stuffed rabbit from her small backpack. "He's good. He helped me be brave on the first day of preschool." "Preschool, huh? That's a big step. Are you learning lots of important things?" "I'm learning to write my name. Want to see?" Amber was already digging in her backpack for the paper she'd been practicing on. Aretha watched the interaction with a mixture of amazement and something that felt dangerously close to longing. George had never shown genuine interest in Amber's accomplishments. He had seen their daughter as an extension of his property, not as a person with her own thoughts and dreams. "That's beautiful handwriting, Amber," Caspian said seriously, examining the paper covered with crooked letters. "You're going to be ready for kindergarten before you know it." "Mr. Whitmore," Aretha began hesitantly, "I'm sorry to bother you, but you said, if I ever needed legal advice." "Of course. Please come in. And it's Caspian, remember?" His office was exactly what Aretha had expected, warm, inviting, and filled with books. A large mahogany desk dominated one corner, but the rest of the space was arranged like a living room, with comfortable chairs and a coffee table scattered with legal magazines and children's books. In one corner sat a small play area with blocks, coloring books, and a miniature table and chairs. A framed photograph on his desk showed Caspian holding the beautiful toddler he had mentioned, a little girl with curly blonde hair and bright blue eyes. "Is that your daughter?" Aretha asked, gesturing toward the photograph. Something shifted in Caspian's expression, pain, loss, and overwhelming love all mixed together. "Yes, that's Evangeline. We call her Evie. She's 2.5. She's beautiful. She has your eyes. She has her mother's everything else," Caspian said quietly, then seemed to shake himself back to the present. "But please, tell me what's going on. How can I help?" Aretha explained the situation with her car and the mechanic's suspicious estimate. As she talked, Caspian took notes, asked thoughtful questions, and never once made her feel foolish for seeking help with something so mundane. $800 for a transmission repair on a 12-year-old Honda. Caspian frowned, tapping his pen against his notepad. That does seem excessive. Do you have the written estimate? Aretha pulled the crumpled paper from her purse and Caspian studied it carefully. As he read, Amber wandered over to the children's area and began building a tower with colorful blocks. Mrs. Rice, Aretha, I think you're right to be suspicious. This estimate includes several repairs that probably aren't necessary, and the labor charges are inflated. Would you be comfortable if I made a few phone calls? I know some honest mechanics in the area. I can't afford to pay you for your time, Aretha said quietly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have... Stop. Caspian's voice was gentle but firm. You're not paying me anything. Sometimes helping someone is payment enough. An hour later, Caspian had arranged for Aretha's car to be towed to Murphy's Honest Auto Repair, where his friend Danny promised to give her a fair assessment. He had also written a strongly worded letter to Bob's auto shop, demanding they return her car without charge and threatening legal action if they refused. How did you learn to do that? Aretha asked as they walked toward the parking lot behind his office. Do what? Make people listen. Make them take you seriously. Caspian was quiet for a moment, considering her question. My father was a civil rights lawyer back in the 60s and 70s. He taught me that the law should protect people, not exploit them. He used to say that every person deserves dignity, regardless of their bank account or their past. They reached his car, a modest blue sedan that looked reliable but not flashy. As he unlocked the doors, Aretha caught sight of a car seat in the back. Where is Evie today? With my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. She watches Evie when I have court or client meetings. He paused, his hand on the car door. Her mother died when she was born. Complications during delivery. So it's just the two of us now. The pain in his voice was raw and immediate, the kind of grief that time softens but never fully heals. Aretha recognized it because she carried her own version, not from death, but from the loss of innocence, of trust, of the person she had been before George's fists taught her to flinch. I'm sorry, she said softly. That must be incredibly difficult. Some days are harder than others, but Evie, she's amazing. She's got this laugh that could cure anything, and she's stubborn as a mule when she wants something. She keeps me going. As he drove them to Murphy's Auto Repair, Amber chattering happily in the back seat about her new blocks creation, Aretha found herself studying Caspian's profile. There was something peaceful about being in a car with a man who didn't drive aggressively, who didn't curse at other drivers, who made sure everyone was wearing their seatbelt before starting the engine. Can I ask you something? She said as they waited at a red light. Why are you being so kind to us? You don't know us. We're strangers. Caspian glanced at her, then back at the road as the light turned green. Maybe that's exactly why. Sometimes strangers are the easiest people to help because there are no complications, no expectations, just one person helping another person because it's the right thing to do. Danny Murphy turned out to be a bear of a man with grease under his fingernails and honesty in his eyes. After examining Aretha's car for 30 minutes, he delivered the verdict. The transmission was fine, but she needed a new alternator and battery, total cost, including labor, $250. That other guy was trying to rob you blind, Danny said, shaking his head in disgust. There's nothing wrong with your transmission that a good alternator won't fix. As Aretha wrote out a check for the repairs, using almost all of her carefully saved emergency fund, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Caspian stood beside her, his expression serious. Let me pay for this. Absolutely not. Aretha, please, consider it a loan if that makes you feel better. You can pay me back whenever you're able. She turned to face him fully, studying his face for any sign of the ulterior motives she had learned to expect. But all she saw was genuine concern and a desire to help that seemed to come from someplace deep and honest. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you deserve someone in your corner. Because Amber deserves to see her mother treated with respect. Because sometimes the universe puts people in our path for a reason." Aretha looked over at Amber, who was showing Danny her stuffed rabbit and explaining in great detail about Coco's monster-fighting abilities. Her daughter was laughing, completely unafraid, trusting in a way that Aretha had forgotten was possible. "Okay," she said finally, "but it's a loan. I will pay you back." "Deal." As they shook hands, Aretha felt something shift in her chest, a tiny crack in the wall she had built around her heart, letting in just the smallest ray of something that might eventually become hope. Chapter 3. Seeds of Trust. December 1999. Snow was falling on Christmas Eve in Atlanta, a miracle that happened maybe once every 10 years. And Aretha Rice had never seen anything more beautiful. She stood in the window of Magnolia Dreams flower shop, watching the fat white flakes drift past the streetlights like falling stars. The shop was closed for the holiday, but she had stayed late to finish a wedding arrangement for tomorrow's ceremony. The bride had specifically requested white roses and baby's breath, and Aretha had spent hours crafting each bouquet with the kind of precision that came from finding purpose in beauty. Mrs. Chen had officially made her shop manager 3 weeks ago, complete with a modest raise and the keys to open and close. It was the first time in Aretha's life that someone had trusted her with real responsibility, and she treated the flower shop like the sanctuary it had become. 4 months of working with flowers had taught her that beauty could bloom anywhere, even in the harshest conditions. The winter roses in the cooler had survived frost and cold to produce the most exquisite petals, and sometimes Aretha felt like those roses, damaged but not destroyed, scarred but still capable of something beautiful. The bell above the door chimed, letting in a swirl of cold air and snowflakes. Aretha turned, expecting to see Mrs. Chen returning for something she had forgotten, but instead found Caspian Whitmore standing in the doorway with a small blonde child bundled in a bright red coat. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, snow dusting his dark hair. "I saw the lights on and thought you might still be open. We can come back tomorrow." "No, please, come in." Aretha set down her floral shears and moved toward them, noting how the little girl clung to Caspian's hand. "You must be Evie." The child peered out from behind her father's legs, taking in Aretha's gentle expression and the flower shop's magical atmosphere. At 2.5, Evie Whitmore was exactly as beautiful as her photograph had suggested, with blonde curls escaping from beneath a knitted hat and eyes that mirrored her father's kindness. "Daddy, it smells like Mama's garden," Evie whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Caspian's face tightened with pain so brief that Aretha might have missed it if she hadn't learned to recognize grief in all its forms. "Serafina loved gardening," he explained quietly. "She grew the most incredible roses." "What kind?" Aretha asked, leading them deeper into the shop where the warmth could chase away the winter chill. "White roses mostly. David Austin varieties, Iceberg, and Winchester Cathedral." She said they reminded her of wedding dresses and first communions and all the pure moments in life. Aretha's heart ached for this man, who spoke of his late wife with such tender reverence. She moved to the cooler and carefully selected 3 perfect white roses, arranging them with sprigs of holly and white ribbon. "For Serafina," she said simply, handing him the small bouquet. "No charge." Caspian stared at the flowers, his throat working as he struggled with emotion. "Thank you," he managed finally. That's incredibly kind." "Daddy, are these for Mama?" Evie asked, reaching up to touch one of the rose petals with careful fingers. "Yes, sweetheart. We'll take them to visit Mama tomorrow." Aretha felt her eyes burn with tears she couldn't shed in front of this brave little girl who would spend Christmas morning at her mother's grave. The unfairness of it, that Evie would grow up without knowing the woman who had given her life, struck Aretha like a physical blow. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" she asked impulsively. "I was just making some for myself." She had been doing no such thing, but the lie seemed necessary. Caspian looked like he needed warmth and companionship, and Evie's small face was red with cold, despite her winter coat. "We don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. Please." Aretha led them to the small break room behind the shop, where she kept a hot plate and a few basic supplies. As she heated milk in a saucepan and stirred in cocoa powder, Caspian helped Evie out of her coat and settled her in one of the chairs. "Mrs. Rice, where's your little girl?" Evie asked, accepting a mug of hot chocolate topped with tiny marshmallows. "Amber is with her grandmother in Savannah for Christmas," Aretha explained. "My mama wanted to spoil her with presents and sweet potato pie." The truth was more complicated. Delilah May Rice had insisted on taking Amber for the holidays, partly to give Aretha a break, and partly because she worried that her daughter was working too hard and forgetting how to enjoy life. "You need to remember you're only 31 years old," her mother had said. "You got many years left to live, baby girl. Don't spend them all looking backward." "Are you lonely without her?" Evie asked with the directness that only small children possessed. "A little," Aretha admitted, surprised by the child's insight. "But I have the flowers to keep me company." "Flowers are good friends," Evie agreed seriously. "They don't yell or break things." The innocent comment hung in the air like a physical presence, and Aretha saw Caspian's expression sharpen with understanding. This child, despite her young age, had learned the same lesson that Amber had, that some people were safe and some people weren't, that loud voices and broken things were warnings to be feared. "No, sweetheart," Aretha said gently. "Good friends never yell or break things. Good friends are gentle and kind." She glanced at Caspian and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was admiration there and something deeper, a recognition that passed between two people who had both learned to value gentleness because they had known its absence. "Evie," Caspian said suddenly, "would you like to help Mrs. Rice with her flowers? I bet she could teach you how to make a bouquet." "Really?" Evie's face lit up with excitement. "I can touch them." "Of course you can touch them. Just be gentle like your daddy taught you." For the next hour, Aretha guided Evie through the basics of flower arranging, showing her how to cut stems at an angle, how to strip leaves that would sit below the waterline, and how to arrange different blooms for the best effect. Evie was a natural, her small hands surprisingly steady as she placed each flower with careful consideration. Caspian watched from a nearby chair, occasionally offering encouragement, but mostly just observing the way his daughter bloomed under Aretha's patient instruction. There was something magical about watching these two people, one small and innocent, one scarred but healing, create beauty together. "Look, Daddy!" Evie held up a small arrangement of red carnations and white baby's breath. "I made Christmas flowers." "They're absolutely beautiful, sweetheart. Mrs. Rice is an excellent teacher." "Can we come back and make more flowers?" Evie asked, looking between her father and Aretha with hopeful eyes. "If Mrs. Rice doesn't mind having visitors," Caspian said carefully. "I would love that," Aretha replied, and meant it completely. The snow was falling harder when they finally prepared to leave, coating Atlanta in a blanket of white that transformed the familiar city into something from a fairy tale. Caspian bundled Evie back into her coat, while Aretha wrapped the child's flower arrangement in tissue paper. "Thank you," Caspian said as they stood by the door, "for the flowers, for the hot chocolate, for being so wonderful with Evie. This has been the best part of our Christmas Eve." "Thank you for stopping by. I didn't realize how much I needed the company." There was a moment of silence, comfortable and warm despite the cold air seeping through the door. Aretha found herself looking into Caspian's eyes and seeing something that made her heart beat a little faster. Not fear, but possibility. "Aretha," he said quietly, using her first name for the first time, "would you like to have dinner sometime? Nothing fancy, just dinner. Maybe we could take the girls to that new family restaurant on Ponce." The question hung between them like a bridge she could choose to cross or leave unbuilt. 6 months ago, the thought of having dinner with a man would have sent her into a panic attack. But this was Caspian, who had helped her with her car, who spoke gently to her daughter, who arranged white roses for his late wife's grave. "I would like that," she said softly. "Good. I'll call you after Christmas." As they walked toward his car, Evie turned back to wave at Aretha through the shop window. "Bye, Miss Aretha. Thank you for teaching me about flowers." Aretha waved back, watching as Caspian carefully buckled his daughter into her car seat and brushed snow off his windshield. When they drove away, their taillights disappearing into the swirling snow, she remained at the window for a long time. For the first time since her divorce, Christmas Eve didn't feel lonely. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something she didn't dare name yet, something fragile and precious that would need careful tending to grow. Like flowers in winter, love required patience, protection, and faith that spring would eventually come. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white roses made of ice and possibility. Chapter 4. Blooming Hearts. Spring 2000. The cherry blossoms in Piedmont Park had exploded into life overnight, painting Atlanta in shades of pink and white that made Aretha's heart sing with hope. She walked slowly along the tree-lined path, 5-year-old Amber skipping ahead, while 3-year-old Evie toddled beside her, both girls chattering about everything and nothing with the endless enthusiasm of childhood. 6 weeks of regular Sunday afternoon outings had transformed them from strangers into something that looked remarkably like family. "Miss Aretha, look!" Amber called, pointing to a cluster of particularly beautiful blossoms. "They're the same color as the roses in your shop." "You're absolutely right, sweetheart. Nature is the best teacher when it comes to color combinations." Behind them, Caspian carried a picnic basket and a blanket, his law practice thriving enough now that he could afford to take Sunday afternoons off. The winter months had been kind to both of them. Aretha's promotion to assistant manager at Magnolia Dreams had come with another small raise, and Caspian had won a high-profile custody case that brought several new clients to his practice. More importantly, they had grown comfortable with each other in the way that came from spending time together without pressure or expectations. Their Sunday outings had become sacred, sometimes the park, sometimes the zoo, occasionally the children's museum downtown, always with both girls, always casual, always ending with the warm knowledge that they would see each other again the following week. "Daddy, can we feed the ducks today?" Evie asked, tugging on Caspian's free hand. "That's exactly what we're going to do, Princess. I brought a whole bag of duck food." They settled on a blanket near the lake, where mallards paddled hopefully near the shore and the afternoon sun painted everything in golden light. Aretha had packed sandwiches and fruit, while Caspian contributed homemade cookies that his neighbor Mrs. Patterson had taught him to bake. "These are incredible," Aretha said, biting into a chocolate chip cookie that was somehow both crispy and chewy. "You made these yourself?" "Don't sound so surprised," Caspian laughed. "I'm a man of many hidden talents." "Name 3, Aretha challenged, enjoying the easy banter that had developed between them. "Well, I can bake cookies, I can change a tire in under 10 minutes, and I can sing every song from The Little Mermaid from memory." "Daddy sings when he gives me baths," Evie announced proudly. "He's really good at the crab song." "The crab song?" Aretha raised an eyebrow. "Under the Sea," Caspian sang in a surprisingly good Caribbean accent, making both girls dissolve into giggles. Under the sea, darling, it's better down where it's wetter. Take it from me. Aretha found herself laughing harder than she had in years, watching this serious attorney singing Disney songs in the middle of a public park without a trace of self-consciousness. It was such a contrast to George, who had considered any display of joy or silliness to be beneath his dignity. "Your turn," Caspian said when the girls had run off to chase butterflies. 3 hidden talents. Aretha considered this seriously. I can speak Spanish fluently, I can make a mean sweet potato pie, and I can name every flower in this park. Spanish? Really? How did you learn? My first job after high school was at a hotel downtown. Half the housekeeping staff spoke Spanish, and they taught me during our breaks. I loved learning about their families, their traditions. She paused, watching Amber and Evie examining something in the grass. It was the first time I realized how big the world was beyond my little corner of Georgia. What made you stop working at the hotel? The question was casual, but Aretha heard the deeper curiosity behind it. She had shared pieces of her story with Caspian over the past months, but never the complete picture of how George had systematically isolated her from friends, jobs, and independence. "I met George," she said simply. "He didn't like me working there, said it wasn't appropriate for his girlfriend to be cleaning up after strangers." Caspian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "So you quit?" "I was 19 and thought I was in love. I thought he was protecting me." She picked at the grass beside the blanket, remembering the girl she had been, naive, trusting, desperate to be loved. He had this way of making his controlling behavior seem romantic. He wanted to take care of me, provide for me. It took me a long time to understand the difference between protection and possession. "I'm sorry," Caspian said quietly. "That must have been incredibly difficult to navigate, especially at such a young age. The hardest part was losing myself little by little and not even realizing it was happening. By the time I understood what he was doing, I felt trapped. I had no job, no money, no friends he hadn't driven away. What changed? What made you finally leave?" Aretha was quiet for a long moment, watching their daughters play in the dappled sunlight. "One night, Amber asked me why Daddy made me cry so much. She was 3 years old and she was trying to comfort me after he had thrown a plate against the wall during dinner. I realized that I was teaching her that love looked like fear, that it was normal for men to hurt the people they claimed to care about." "That must have been terrifying," Caspian said. "Leaving with a small child, starting over with nothing. It was the scariest thing I'd ever done, but staying would have been scarier. I couldn't let Amber grow up thinking that was what she deserved from life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the girls who had moved on to collecting fallen cherry blossoms in their small hands. The afternoon was warm and peaceful, filled with the sounds of families enjoying the beautiful spring day. "Can I ask you something?" Aretha said finally. "Of course. Do you ever worry about dating again? About what it might mean for Evie?" Caspian was quiet for so long that Aretha wondered if she had overstepped some invisible boundary. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful and thoughtful. "Every day," he admitted. "Serafina and I had such a short time together. We met in law school, got married right after graduation, and she was gone 18 months later. Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying her memory by even thinking about moving forward." "But you are thinking about it." "I'm thinking about you," he said simply, turning to meet her eyes. "I think about you when I'm reviewing cases and smell the flowers you always have on your desk. I think about you when Evie talks about Miss Aretha and how you taught her to arrange flowers. I think about you when I'm falling asleep and wonder if this feeling in my chest might actually be happiness starting to grow back." Aretha's breath caught in her throat. Caspian ... "I know we both have reasons to be careful," he continued. I know you need time to heal, and I know I'm still learning how to be a single father. But I also know that what I feel when I'm with you is something I thought I'd never feel again." Before Aretha could respond, Amber came running back to the blanket with her hands full of cherry blossoms. "Mama, look, I picked these for you because they're the same color as the roses that made you smile yesterday." "They're beautiful, baby girl, thank you." As Amber settled back on the blanket beside Evie, both girls began weaving the blossoms into crowns with the intense concentration that only children brought to important tasks. Aretha watched them work, marveling at how naturally they had bonded, how easily they had accepted each other as sisters. "They're going to be heartbroken if we mess this up," she said quietly. "Then we won't mess it up," Caspian replied. "We'll take it slow, be honest with each other, put them first. But Aretha, I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to try." The girls finished their flower crowns and insisted on placing them on the adults' heads, dissolving into giggles at how silly they looked. As they packed up the picnic and prepared to leave, Evie took Aretha's hand while Amber claimed Caspian's. "Miss Aretha," Evie said as they walked back toward the parking lot, "are you going to be my mama now?" The innocent question stopped Aretha in her tracks. She looked at Caspian, who was clearly as surprised as she was by his daughter's directness. "Sweetheart," Caspian began carefully, "Miss Aretha is our very special friend. We don't need to worry about labels right now." "But I want her to be my mama," Evie said, with the stubborn persistence of a 3-year-old. "She smells like flowers and she doesn't yell and she makes you smile the way you used to smile in the pictures with my first mama." Aretha knelt down to Evie's level, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. "Baby girl, I care about you and your daddy very much, but these are grown-up feelings that take time to understand. For now, can you just be happy that we're all friends who like spending time together?" "Okay," Evie said agreeably, "but I'm still going to wish for it when I blow out my birthday candles." As they reached their cars, Caspian caught Aretha's hand gently. "Dinner this week? Just the two of us?" "I'd like that," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Friday night? I'll pick you up at 7. It's a date." The words hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. As she drove home with Amber, chattering about their wonderful day, Aretha realized that for the first time in years, she was looking forward to tomorrow, to next week, to the future that was slowly unfurling like cherry blossoms in spring. Chapter 5. Storms and Shelter. Summer 2000 to winter 2001. The sound of glass shattering in the parking lot made Aretha's blood turn to ice, even though she was safe inside Magnolia Dreams, with the doors locked and the security system armed. It was 10 o'clock on a humid July evening, and she had stayed late to prepare arrangements for a wedding the next morning. Through the front window, she could see George's familiar silhouette weaving between the parked cars, a beer bottle in one hand, and rage radiating from every line of his body. "Aretha!" His voice carried through the summer air, slurred and dangerous. "I know you're in there. Come out here and talk to me like a woman." Her hands shaking, Aretha reached for the phone and dialed the number she had memorized 6 months ago. Caspian answered on the second ring, and the sound of his voice was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. "It's George," she whispered. "He's here, and he's drunk, and I think he's going to try to break in. I'm calling the police right now, and then I'm coming to get you. Do not leave that building. Do you understand? Stay exactly where you are." Through the window, Aretha watched George pick up another beer bottle from the case he had apparently brought with him. He hurled it at the flower shop's front window, where it exploded in a shower of brown glass and foam. "You think you're too good for me now?" George screamed. "You think that fancy lawyer boyfriend of yours is going to protect you? I'm Amber's father. I have rights." The police arrived within 10 minutes, their red and blue lights painting the parking lot in colors that reminded Aretha of the bruises George used to leave on her arms. She watched through the window as they approached him with hands on their weapons, shouting commands she couldn't quite hear. George's arrest was swift and efficient, but Aretha remained frozen behind the counter until Caspian's gentle knock on the back door finally convinced her it was safe to move. "Are you hurt?" He wrapped her in his arms before she could answer, and Aretha melted into his embrace, breathing in the scent of his cologne and the safety he represented. "I'm okay," she managed, though her voice was shaking. He didn't get inside, he threw bottles and screamed. "The girls." "At my mother's in Savannah for the week, thank God." Caspian pulled back to look at her face, his eyes dark with concern and something that looked like barely controlled fury. "This ends now, Aretha. Tomorrow morning, we're filing for a restraining order modification, and I'm going to make sure he understands that harassing you has legal consequences." "He'll just get angrier." "Let him get angry. Anger behind bars can't hurt you." They sat in his car in the parking lot while the police finished their report, Aretha's head on Caspian's shoulder as she tried to stop shaking. 6 weeks of dating had deepened their relationship into something steady and sure, built on shared Sunday dinners, late-night phone calls, and the growing certainty that what they felt for each other was real and lasting. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what? For bringing this chaos into your life, for putting you and Evie in danger just by being with you." Caspian turned to face her fully, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Aretha Marie Rice, you listen to me. You are not responsible for his behavior. You are not chaos. You are the best thing that has happened to me and Evie since Serafina died, and I will not let that man make you believe otherwise." The use of her full name, spoken with such fierce tenderness, broke something loose in Aretha's chest. She had been holding her breath for months, waiting for Caspian to realize that loving her came with complications, that her past would always cast shadows on their future. "I love you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I love you, and that terrifies me because I don't know how to love someone without losing myself." "Then we'll learn together," Caspian said simply, "because I love you too, and I'm not going anywhere." Their first real kiss happened in the parking lot of a flower shop, surrounded by broken glass, tasting of salt tears and promises they were finally brave enough to make. By Christmas 2000, their lives had woven together so completely that Aretha could barely remember what loneliness felt like. She woke up in her own apartment on Christmas morning, but within an hour she was at Caspian's house, helping him make pancakes while Amber and Evie tore through presents with the single-minded determination of children who had been very, very good all year. "Daddy, look!" Evie held up a dollhouse that Caspian had spent 3 weeks assembling in secret. "It has real, tiny furniture." "Miss Aretha, thank you for the flower kit." Amber clutched her children's gardening set, complete with seeds, small tools, and a watering can decorated with sunflowers. Caspian's house was a modest 2-story colonial in the Virginia Highland neighborhood, with hardwood floors, a fireplace that actually worked, and a backyard big enough for the garden Aretha had been dreaming about. More importantly, it felt like home in a way that her apartment never had. Lived in and loved, filled with laughter and the comfortable chaos of family life. "There's one more present," Caspian said, after the girls had settled down to play with their new toys. He pulled a small wrapped box from behind the Christmas tree, his expression nervous and hopeful. Aretha's heart stopped. The box was the wrong size for an engagement ring, but after 8 months together, she had begun to wonder if they were moving towards something permanent. Inside was a key, brass, newly cut, attached to a keychain shaped like a magnolia blossom. "It's not what you think," Caspian said quickly. I mean, it is what you think, but not what you think. He took a deep breath and tried again. I want you and Amber to move in with me and Evie. I want us to be a family officially. I want to wake up with you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to help Amber with her homework and teach her how to ride a bike. I want Evie to have a mother who loves her as much as I do. Aretha stared at the key, her vision blurring with tears she couldn't control. Caspian ... I know it's a big step. I know we haven't talked about marriage yet, and I don't want you to think I'm pressuring you. This is about us building something together, taking our time, seeing how we work as a family before we make it legal. What about Serafina? The question came out smaller than Aretha intended, but it had been weighing on her heart for months. Caspian was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. Serafina will always be Evie's first mother, and I will always love the memory of what we had. But you are going to be Evie's real mother, the one who teaches her about flowers and forgiveness, who braids her hair and helps her navigate heartbreak and celebrates her victories. Serafina gave Evie life, but you're going to give her everything that comes after. Through the doorway to the living room, they could hear the girls playing together, their voices mixing in the kind of harmony that suggested they had been sisters all their lives. What do the girls think about this idea? Aretha asked. Why don't we ask them? Caspian called to the living room. Amber, Evie, can you come here for a minute? The girls appeared in the kitchen doorway, Evie carrying her new doll and Amber still wearing the gardening gloves from her kit. How would you two feel if Miss Aretha and Amber came to live with us? Caspian asked. If we all lived in the same house like a real family. Yes, Evie shouted, launching herself at Aretha with enough force to nearly knock her off her chair. I want Miss Aretha to be my mama forever and ever. Amber was more reserved, studying the adults with the careful consideration of a child who had learned not to trust promises too quickly. Would we still be safe? Would my daddy still not be allowed to hurt us? The question broke Aretha's heart and filled her with pride simultaneously. At 5 years old, Amber was already learning to protect herself, to think critically about the choices that would affect her future. Sweetheart, Aretha knelt down to her daughter's level. Mr. Caspian is a lawyer. He knows all about the laws that keep bad people away from good people. Living here would make us even safer because we'd have him to protect us. And I would always, always protect you both, Caspian added solemnly. That's what daddies do for their families. You want to be my daddy? Amber asked, and the hope in her voice was so pure it made every adult in the room cry. More than anything in the world, if that's okay with you. Amber considered this gravely, then nodded. Okay, but I get to keep my rabbit. Coco is always welcome here? Caspian laughed, wiping his eyes. They moved in on New Year's Day 2001 in a snowstorm that turned the process into an adventure rather than a chore. Mrs. Patterson helped with Evie while Caspian and Aretha packed Aretha's apartment, and by evening they were all settled in their new home, eating take-out Chinese food in front of the fireplace while the girls built a fort out of moving boxes. No regrets? Caspian asked as they sat together on the couch, watching their daughters giggle over some private joke. Only that we didn't do this sooner, Aretha replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. That night, as she lay in Caspian's arms in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives, Aretha marveled at how completely her world had changed. 18 months ago, she had been a frightened woman fleeing an abusive marriage with nothing but a daughter and a desperate hope for something better. Now she had a man who loved her scars as much as her strength, a daughter who was thriving in an environment of unconditional love, and a stepdaughter who had claimed her as mama with the fierce certainty of a child who knew she was wanted. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white promise. Inside, four people who had found each other against all odds settled into the rhythm of forever. Chapter 6. Building Dreams. From 2001 to 2005, the morning sun streaming through the stained glass windows of Oakland Cemetery Chapel painted rainbow patterns across Aretha's white dress as she walked toward the man who would become her forever. April 14th, 2001 dawned clear and warm, with dogwood blossoms framing the historic chapel like nature's own wedding decorations. Aretha had chosen this venue not for its grandeur, but for its gardens, acres of flowering trees and peaceful pathways where she and Caspian had walked many Sunday afternoons, planning their future with the careful hope of two people who had learned that love was precious, precisely because it could be lost. Delilah Mae Rice walked beside her daughter, resplendent in lavender silk and tears of joy. At 54, Delilah had worried she might never see Aretha truly happy again, and watching her daughter glow with the confidence of a woman deeply loved was worth every prayer she had whispered over the past 2 years. "You sure about this, baby girl?" Delilah whispered as they paused at the chapel doors. "More sure than I've ever been about anything in my life," Aretha replied, and the certainty in her voice made her mother's heart sing. The chapel was small and intimate, filled with the people who had supported them through the journey from broken to whole. Mrs. Chen sat in the front row beside Mrs. Patterson, both women beaming with the pride of surrogate mothers. Caspian's law school friends occupied one side, while Aretha's co-workers from Magnolia Dreams filled the other. But Aretha's eyes found only Caspian, standing at the altar in a charcoal grey suit that made his blue eyes look like summer sky. Beside him stood his best man, Danny Murphy from the auto shop, grinning so widely his face looked like it might split. At the front of the aisle, Amber and Evie waited in matching pale pink dresses, both girls clutching small bouquets of white roses and baby's breath. At 6 and 4, they understood that today was the day their family would become official, and their excitement was infectious. "Dearly beloved," began Reverend Jackson, a gentleman in his 70s who had agreed to perform the ceremony despite Aretha's unconventional request to write their own vows. "We are gathered here today not just to witness the union of Caspian and Aretha, but to celebrate the creation of a family built on love, trust, and the courage to believe in second chances." When it came time for vows, Caspian spoke first, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "Aretha, when I met you, I was a man learning to live with half a heart. You didn't just heal what was broken. You showed me that love could be bigger than loss, stronger than fear, and deeper than I ever imagined possible. Today, I promise not just to love you, but to love Amber as my own daughter, to protect both of you with everything I have, and to build with you a home where laughter is louder than tears, and hope is stronger than memory." Aretha's vows came from a heart so full she could barely speak. "Caspian, you taught me that gentleness is not weakness, that protection doesn't require possession, and that real love makes you more yourself, not less. You gave me back my voice, my dreams, and my faith in tomorrow. Today, I promise to love you through every season, to raise our daughters together with wisdom and wonder, and to choose you every day for the rest of our lives." The rings they exchanged were simple gold bands, but they felt like everything. Promises made tangible, love given form. "By the power vested in me by the state of Georgia," Reverend Jackson smiled, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caspian, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was soft and sweet, tasting of forever and new beginnings. When they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, the chapel erupted in cheers and applause. But the most magical moment came during the recessional, when Amber tugged on Caspian's jacket and whispered, "Can I call you Daddy now?" "I would be honored," Caspian replied, lifting her into his arms while Evie claimed Aretha's hand. The reception was held in the chapel gardens, with tables scattered beneath flowering dogwood trees and string lights twinkling overhead like captured stars. Mrs. Chen had insisted on providing the flowers, cascading arrangements of white roses, peonies, and jasmine that filled the evening air with perfume. During their first dance to Etta James's At Last, Aretha marveled at how perfectly she fit in Caspian's arms, how naturally they moved together, how completely right this all felt. "No regrets," he murmured in her ear. "Only that it took us so long to find each other," she replied. "We found each other exactly when we were supposed to," Caspian said. "Not a moment sooner, not a moment later." The years that followed passed like pages in a well-loved book, full of ordinary moments that felt extraordinary when shared with the right people. They bought a house in the Candler Park neighborhood in late 2001, a 1920s bungalow with hardwood floors, a front porch perfect for evening conversations, and a backyard large enough for Aretha's dream garden. The girls helped plant their first vegetables that spring, tomatoes, herbs, and flowers arranged in neat rows that would become wilder and more beautiful with each passing season. Caspian's law practice thrived as word spread about the attorney who genuinely cared about his clients' well-being beyond their legal problems. He specialized in family law and domestic violence cases, often working pro bono for women who reminded him of the scared but determined person Aretha had been when they first met. Aretha's career blossomed as well. When Mrs. Chen decided to retire in 2003, she sold Magnolia Dreams to Aretha for a price so reasonable it was essentially a gift. "This shop was always meant to be yours," the elderly woman said. "You understand that flowers are about more than beauty, they're about hope." Under Aretha's management, Magnolia Dreams became more than a flower shop. She hired 3 other women, all survivors of difficult circumstances, and created an environment where second chances bloomed as naturally as the roses in her coolers. The shop's reputation grew, earning contracts with several hotels and event venues across Atlanta. The girls flourished in their stable, loving environment. Amber excelled in school, showing particular aptitude for reading and writing, while Evie discovered a love for science and spent hours in the garden studying insects and plant growth patterns. In 2004, Caspian formally adopted Amber, a process that required George's consent. To everyone's surprise, George signed the papers without a fight. Prison had aged him, and the anger that had once defined him seemed to have burned itself out, leaving behind a tired man who finally understood that he had lost his family through his own choices. "I just want her to be safe," George said during the brief court hearing, "and I know she's safe with you." It was the first time Aretha had seen him in 3 years, and she felt nothing but pity for the broken man who bore little resemblance to the monster who had haunted her dreams. By 2005, their life had settled into the kind of comfortable rhythm that comes from deep contentment. Amber was 10 and already talking about becoming a lawyer like her daddy, while 8-year-old Evie announced her intention to become a flower scientist who would create new varieties of roses. Sunday dinners at Delilah's house in Savannah became monthly traditions, with the older woman spoiling her granddaughters and offering gentle wisdom to the young couple who had built something beautiful from the ashes of their separate sorrows. "You know what I love most about watching you two," Delilah said one evening as they sat on her front porch, watching the girls chase fireflies in the growing dusk. "What's that, Mama?" Aretha asked, settled comfortably in the porch swing with Caspian's arm around her shoulders. "You never stopped becoming. So many couples get married and think the work is done, but you two keep growing into better versions of yourselves. Caspian makes you braver, and you make him gentler, and both of you make those babies believe they can be anything they want to be." As they drove home that night, the girls asleep in the back seat and Atlanta's skyline glowing in the distance, Aretha reflected on how completely her world had transformed. 4 years ago, she had been a frightened single mother with no prospects and no hope. Now she was a successful businesswoman, a beloved wife, and a mother to 2 daughters who would never doubt their worth or accept less than they deserved. "What are you thinking about?" Caspian asked, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Just counting my blessings," Aretha replied, "and wondering what we did to deserve this much happiness." "We survived," Caspian said simply. "We chose love over fear, hope over despair. We earned this happiness by refusing to let our past define our future." That night, as she tucked the girls into their beds and kissed her husband goodnight, Aretha offered a prayer of gratitude for the long road that had led her home to this life, these people, this love that felt as infinite as the Georgia sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to prove that families built on love and choice could be stronger than those bound only by blood. But tonight, she was simply grateful to be exactly where she belonged. Chapter 7. When Love is Tested, from 2005 to 2010. The words hung in the sterile hospital air like a death sentence. "Your husband needs immediate cardiac surgery, Mrs. Whitmore." Aretha stared at Dr. Martinez, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. Just that morning, Caspian had been making pancakes for the girls, laughing at Evie's story about her science project, helping Amber with her math homework. Now he lay unconscious in the cardiac unit, machines monitoring every beat of the heart that had suddenly, without warning, nearly stopped working. "The good news is we caught it early," Dr. Martinez continued, her voice professionally gentle. "Mr. Whitmore is young and otherwise healthy. The surgery has an excellent success rate, but there are always risks." The rest of the doctor's words faded into background noise as Aretha's world narrowed to a single terrifying reality: she might lose him. After everything they had built together, after 4 years of marriage that had healed wounds she thought would never close, she might have to face life without the man who had taught her that love could be safe. "Mama, is Daddy going to die?" Amber's voice was small and scared, pulling Aretha back to the present. At 10 years old, her daughter was mature enough to understand that something was seriously wrong, but young enough to need reassurance that her world wasn't about to collapse again. "No, baby girl," Aretha said, gathering both girls close. "Daddy's heart is sick, but the doctors are going to fix it. He's going to be fine." The words felt like lies, even as she spoke them, but they were the only truth she could give her children right now. Evie, 8 years old and still young enough to believe that parents could fix anything, looked up at Aretha with complete trust. "You'll take care of him, right, Mama? Like you take care of the flowers when they get sick?" "Yes, sweetheart. Mama will take care of Daddy." The surgery lasted 6 hours. Aretha spent every minute in the waiting room, alternately pacing and sitting, praying and bargaining with a God she hadn't spoken to much since her childhood. Delilah drove up from Savannah to watch the girls, while Mrs. Patterson brought food that no one ate and coffee that grew cold in forgotten cups. When Dr. Martinez finally emerged, still in her surgical scrubs, Aretha's heart stopped beating entirely. "The surgery was successful," the doctor said, and Aretha collapsed into the nearest chair as relief flooded through her. "We were able to clear the blockages and repair the damage. He's going to need extensive recovery time, and there will be lifestyle changes, but Mr. Whitmore should make a full recovery." The next 6 months transformed Aretha from wife to caregiver, from partner to protector. Caspian came home from the hospital weak and discouraged, frustrated by his body's betrayal and terrified of being a burden to his family. "I should be taking care of you," he said one evening, as Aretha helped him into bed after a particularly difficult day of physical therapy. "I should be providing for our family, not lying here like an invalid while you run yourself ragged." Caspian Michael Whitmore, Aretha said firmly, using his full name the way he had used hers that night in the parking lot when she needed to hear the truth. You spent 4 years taking care of me and Amber when we needed it most. Now it's my turn to take care of you. She reorganized her entire life around his recovery. Mrs. Chen's daughter took over day-to-day operations at Magnolia Dreams, while Aretha reduced her hours to part-time. She learned to prepare heart-healthy meals, accompanied him to every doctor's appointment, and became an expert in cardiac rehabilitation. More importantly, she became his anchor when depression threatened to pull him under. The man who had always been her protector now needed protection himself, from his own fear, his own sense of helplessness, his own doubts about whether he would ever be whole again. "Remember what you told me once," Aretha said during one of his darkest moments when he questioned whether she would be better off without him. "You said that love makes us bigger than our circumstances. Your heart might be broken, but your love isn't. And my love for you isn't broken either." By spring 2006, Caspian was back to work part-time, his energy slowly returning along with his confidence. The experience had changed him, made him gentler somehow, more aware of how precious and fragile their happiness really was. But just as they were finding their footing again, George returned to their lives with a vengeance. He had been released from prison in early 2006, supposedly rehabilitated after completing anger management courses and substance abuse treatment. His lawyer filed a motion requesting supervised visitation with Amber, citing his improved mental health and desire to rebuild his relationship with his daughter. "He has rights as her biological father," the court-appointed mediator explained during their first meeting. "The adoption by Mr. Whitmore doesn't negate those rights entirely." Aretha felt like she was living through a nightmare. After 5 years of peace, 5 years of Amber calling Caspian daddy, and barely remembering the man who had terrorized their early years, George wanted back into their lives. "I don't want to see him," Amber said firmly when they explained the situation to her. At 11, she was old enough to express her own preferences, and her feelings were crystal clear. "Caspian is my dad. George is just the man who hurt Mama." The legal battle lasted 8 months and cost them thousands of dollars they couldn't afford. George played the reformed man perfectly, showing up to court in a suit and tie, speaking respectfully to the judge, expressing remorse for his past behavior. But Amber's testimony was devastating in its clarity and strength. "Your Honor," she said, standing straight and tall in the witness box, "I know that man is my biological father, but biology doesn't make someone a dad. A real dad reads bedtime stories and helps with homework and makes you feel safe. A real dad doesn't make your mama cry or throw things or yell so loud the neighbors call the police. Caspian Whitmore is my real dad, and I don't want to see George Thomas ever again." The judge ruled in their favor, denying George's petition and issuing a permanent restraining order. As they left the courthouse, Aretha saw George in the parking lot, no longer playing the reformed man. His face was twisted with the same rage she remembered from their marriage, and for a moment she was 23 years old again, terrified and trapped. But then Caspian's hand found hers, and Amber slipped between them, and Evie took her other hand, and Aretha realized that she wasn't that frightened young woman anymore. She was surrounded by love, protected by law, and strong enough to face whatever came next. The stress of the custody battle and Caspian's health scare took its toll on their marriage, in ways neither of them had anticipated. They found themselves snapping at each other over small things, struggling to find time for intimacy between doctor's appointments and legal meetings. In 2007, they faced their deepest crisis yet when Aretha suffered a miscarriage. They had been trying for a baby since Caspian's full recovery, both of them longing to add to their family, to create a child who would be born into their love rather than adopted into it. When Aretha finally got pregnant at 39, they were over the moon with joy. The miscarriage happened at 12 weeks, sudden and devastating and complete. Aretha lost not just the pregnancy, but her faith in her body, her confidence in the future, and temporarily her ability to believe that good things could last. "Maybe this is punishment," she said one night as they lay in bed, both of them grieving in their separate ways. "Maybe I don't deserve another child after everything I put Amber through in those early years." "That's not how the universe works," Caspian said, pulling her closer. "Bad things happen to good people, and it doesn't mean anything except that life is sometimes cruel and unfair." "I feel so broken," Aretha whispered. "Then we'll heal together," Caspian replied. "Just like we always do." But healing proved more difficult than either of them had expected. Aretha withdrew into herself, throwing herself into work to avoid dealing with her grief. Caspian, still recovering from his own health crisis, struggled to support her while managing his own depression. For 6 months, they lived like polite strangers sharing a house, each of them hurting too much to reach out to the other. The girls sensed the tension and began acting out. Amber's grades slipped, while Evie started having nightmares about her family disappearing. It was Evie who finally broke through their walls. "Are you and Mama getting divorced?" she asked Caspian one evening as he tucked her into bed. "Why would you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because you're sad all the time now, and Mama cries when she thinks we can't see, and nobody laughs anymore. That's what happened before my first Mama died. Everyone got quiet and sad." The innocent observation hit Caspian like a physical blow. In their grief, they were repeating the patterns they had both sworn to break, withdrawing from each other instead of turning toward each other, letting pain drive them apart instead of bringing them together. That night, he found Aretha in their garden, sitting among the roses she had planted when they first moved into the house. The November air was cold, but she seemed unaware of the chill. "We're losing each other," he said simply, sitting beside her on the garden bench. "I know," she replied, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "I don't want to lose us, Aretha. I can't lose us." "Neither do I, but I don't know how to get back to where we were." "Maybe we can't go back," Caspian said. "Maybe we have to go forward to somewhere new." They spent the rest of the night talking, really talking for the first time in months. They talked about their grief, their fear, their guilt, and their love for each other and their children. They cried together, held each other, and began the slow process of rebuilding what they had almost lost. By their 7th wedding anniversary in April 2008, they had emerged from their dark period stronger than before. They renewed their wedding vows in the same garden where they had almost lost each other, with Amber and Evie as their witnesses and Delilah officiating with a minister's license she had gotten online specifically for the occasion. "I promise to choose you again," Aretha said, her hands in Caspian's as the spring sun warmed their faces. "Not just in the easy times, but in the hard times too. Not just when you're strong, but when you're broken. Not just when I'm whole, but when I'm shattered." "I promise to be your shelter in every storm," Caspian replied. "To hold you when you're falling and catch you when you can't hold on. To love you through every season of our lives, even the winter ones." As they kissed beneath the blooming dogwood tree, Aretha felt something shift in her chest. Not healing exactly, but the beginning of acceptance. They would always carry scars from the battles they had fought, individually and together. But scars were proof of survival, evidence that love could endure even when everything else fell apart. The chapter of their lives that began with such promise had been marked by tests they never expected to face. But they had faced them together, and in doing so, had proven that their love was strong enough to weather any storm. Chapter 8. The Long Game Begins. From 2010 to 2018. The photograph was hidden in the back of Amber's calculus textbook, where she thought no one would find it. A newspaper clipping about George Thomas being arrested for assault against his second wife, Maria Santos. Aretha discovered it by accident while helping her 15-year-old daughter with homework, and the look in Amber's eyes when she realized she'd been caught made Aretha's blood run cold. It wasn't shame or embarrassment. It was the calculated focus of someone who had been planning something for a very long time. "How long have you been collecting these?" Aretha asked quietly, sitting on Amber's bed with the clipping in her trembling hands. "Since I was 12, Amber replied, her voice steady and mature beyond her years. "I have a whole file folder hidden in my closet. 27 newspaper articles, police reports I requested through public records, court documents from his divorce proceedings with Maria." "Amber!" Aretha's heart broke as she realized what her daughter had been carrying alone. "Baby girl, why didn't you tell us?" "Because I knew you and Daddy would try to stop me." Amber's dark eyes blazed with the same determination that had once driven Aretha to escape her abuser. "He's out there hurting people, Mama. Maria Santos, Jennifer Walsh before her. God knows how many women we don't even know about. And nobody's stopping him because nobody cares enough to connect the dots. It's not your job to—" "Yes, it is." Amber stood up, pulling a manila folder from behind her winter coats. "Look at this." The folder was thick with documents, each one meticulously organized and annotated in Amber's careful handwriting. Police reports spanning 3 states, hospital records, divorce filings, a pattern of violence so clear and consistent it took Aretha's breath away. "He moves every few years," Amber explained, spreading the papers across her desk like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Gets involved with a new woman, usually someone vulnerable, single mothers, women with financial problems, women without family support. The pattern is always the same: charm, control, escalation, violence." Aretha stared at the documentation, her mind reeling. Her 16-year-old daughter had compiled a more comprehensive case against George than any law enforcement agency had ever attempted. "How did you get all this?" "Public records requests, mostly. Some investigative journalism through the school newspaper. I've been writing to women who escaped him, asking them to share their stories." Amber's voice remained clinical, professional. "Did you know he broke Maria Santos's arm in 2 places? Jennifer Walsh lost hearing in her left ear, and those are just the ones who reported it." The bedroom door opened, and Caspian appeared with 2 cups of hot chocolate, his smile fading when he saw the papers scattered across the desk. "What's going on?" "Our daughter has been conducting a private investigation into George's criminal activities," Aretha said, her voice hollow with shock and admiration. "For 3 years." Caspian set down the mugs and picked up one of the police reports, his expression growing darker with each line he read. "Amber, this is incredibly thorough work, but it's also dangerous. If George found out what you were doing—" "He won't," Amber interrupted. "I'm smarter than he is, and I'm patient. I can wait as long as it takes to destroy him completely." The word destroy hung in the air like a physical presence. This wasn't a teenage fantasy of revenge. It was a methodical, long-term plan being executed by someone who understood exactly what she was attempting. "Sweetheart," Caspian said carefully, "I understand why you want justice for what he did to your mother, to you, to these other women. But revenge isn't the same as justice, and it's not worth sacrificing your own peace of mind." "This isn't about revenge," Amber replied firmly. "This is about prevention. Every day George Thomas walks free is another day he's looking for his next victim. I'm going to make sure he never hurts anyone again." "How?" Aretha asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "I'm going to become a prosecutor. I'm going to specialize in domestic violence cases. I'm going to build an airtight case against him that puts him in prison for the rest of his miserable life." Amber's voice was calm, certain, terrifying in its absolute conviction. And when I'm done, every woman he's ever hurt will know that someone cared enough to fight for them. The next 8 years transformed Amber from a determined teenager into a force of nature. She graduated as valedictorian from North Atlanta High School in 2013. Her acceptance speech focusing on the responsibility privileged people had to protect the vulnerable. Her acceptance to Harvard Law School was never in doubt. Her grades were perfect. Her extracurricular activities focused on legal advocacy, and her personal statement about using law to protect domestic violence victims brought the admissions committee to tears. At Harvard, she threw herself into her studies with the single-minded determination of someone with a specific mission. She clerked for a federal judge who specialized in criminal cases, interned with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, and wrote law review articles about prosecuting domestic violence cases when victims were reluctant to testify. Her professors noted her unusual combination of empathy and ruthlessness. She could comfort a traumatized witness one moment and devastate a defense attorney's argument the next. During her second year, she called Aretha with news that was both triumphant and terrifying. "I've been accepted into the clinic program," Amber said, her voice crackling through the phone connection. "I'll be working on real cases involving domestic violence prosecution." "That's wonderful, baby girl," Aretha replied, though she heard the underlying tension in her daughter's voice. "What aren't you telling me?" "I found him, Mama. George is living in Boston now, and he's engaged to a woman named Patricia Chen. She has 2 young daughters." Aretha's blood turned to ice. "Amber, you cannot—" "I'm not going to do anything illegal or unethical," Amber interrupted. "But I am going to make sure Patricia Chen knows exactly who she's planning to marry. And if he so much as raises his voice to her or those children, I'll be ready." True to her word, Amber began what she called protective surveillance. She befriended Patricia Chen at a coffee shop near her apartment, gradually earning her trust without ever revealing their connection. When George's behavior began to escalate, controlling Patricia's finances, isolating her from friends, showing excessive interest in disciplining her daughters, Amber was there to document everything. "She's keeping a diary now," Amber reported during one of their weekly phone calls. "Writing down every incident, every threat, every time he loses his temper. When he finally crosses the line, we'll have everything we need." "And if he doesn't?" Caspian asked. He had been quietly supporting Amber's mission while publicly expressing concerns about her obsession with George. "He will," Amber said with chilling certainty. "Men like George can't help themselves. The only variable is timing." She was right. In February 2017, during Amber's final semester of law school, George put Patricia Chen in the hospital with a concussion and 3 broken ribs. Amber was the first person Patricia called, and within hours she had helped her file charges, obtain a restraining order, and connect with a safe house for domestic violence victims. More importantly, Amber had compiled enough evidence to convince the Boston District Attorney to file felony charges against George for aggravated domestic violence, assault with intent to cause bodily harm, and child endangerment for traumatizing Patricia's daughters. George's arrest made the local news, and Amber watched the coverage from her law school dorm room with satisfaction so profound it frightened even her. "He's going to plead down to a misdemeanor," she told her parents during a video call. 18 months in county jail, maybe 2 years probation. It's not enough, but it's a start. "A start for what?" Aretha asked, though she suspected she knew. "Building a pattern of escalating violence across multiple jurisdictions. When I'm done documenting his entire criminal history, no judge in America will consider him a candidate for mercy." Amber graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law School in May 2017, her thesis on prosecuting serial domestic abusers earning recognition from the American Bar Association. At her graduation, she made a promise that sent chills down her parents' spines and pride swelling in their hearts. "I'm coming home to Georgia," she announced. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia has offered me a position in their domestic violence prosecution unit. I start in August. Any particular reason you want to work as a federal prosecutor? Caspian asked, though he already knew the answer. Federal crimes cross state lines, Amber replied. George will be released from jail in 18 months, and when he is, I'll be waiting for him. This time, I won't just be his victim's daughter. I'll be the federal prosecutor who's going to destroy him completely. As they drove home from Amber's graduation ceremony, Aretha reflected on the woman her daughter had become. At 22, Amber possessed a combination of legal brilliance and personal vendetta that made her either the most dangerous federal prosecutor in Georgia or the most dedicated advocate for justice, possibly both. Are we doing the right thing? Aretha asked Caspian as they crossed the Georgia state line. Supporting her in this? I don't know, Caspian admitted. But I know that trying to stop her would be impossible and probably wrong. She's not seeking revenge, she's seeking justice, and maybe the world needs someone who cares enough to fight this hard for people who can't fight for themselves. Even if it costs her. Look at her, Aretha. Look at how focused she is, how driven, how absolutely certain of her purpose. I don't think this is costing her anything. I think this is exactly who she was always meant to become. As Atlanta's skyline appeared in the distance, Aretha realized that their family's long journey toward justice was just beginning. The little girl who had once hidden behind her mother's dress was now a Harvard-educated prosecutor with the skills, determination, and legal authority to ensure that George Thomas finally faced consequences for every woman he had ever hurt. The long game had begun, and Amber Whitmore was playing to win. Chapter 9. The Reckoning Builds. 2018 to 2024. The war room looked like something from a crime drama, walls covered with photographs, timelines, and legal documents connected by red string that traced George Thomas's path of destruction across 25 years. Amber had converted the basement of her downtown Atlanta apartment into what she called her Justice Center, a space dedicated entirely to building the federal case that would end George's reign of terror forever. At 24, she had already earned a reputation as the most ruthless domestic violence prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office, with a conviction rate that made defense attorneys tremble. "This is insane, Amber," said Detective Marcus Rodriguez, studying the elaborate display with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You've documented crimes across 6 states, spanning back to 1995. Some of these cases are beyond the statute of limitations." "The individual cases might be," Amber replied, adding another photograph to the wall, George's mugshot from his most recent arrest in Boston. "But together, they establish a pattern of predatory behavior that will support charges under the federal domestic violence statute. And Marcus, I prefer thorough to insane." Over the past 6 years, Amber had systematically rebuilt her life around a single goal, accumulating enough evidence to ensure George Thomas died in prison. She had tracked down 8 of his victims across multiple states, convincing 6 of them to provide sworn statements about their experiences. She had cultivated relationships with law enforcement officers in 5 different jurisdictions, creating a network of allies who fed her information about George's activities. Most importantly, she had positioned herself to be the prosecutor who would handle his case when the time came. "The beauty of the federal domestic violence statute," she explained to Marcus as they reviewed her latest evidence, "is that it covers crimes that cross state lines and allows us to prosecute patterns of behavior rather than individual incidents. Medical records, police reports, witness statements, financial documents showing how he isolated and controlled them across multiple jurisdictions. And you have all of that. I have more than that." Amber pulled out a thick file labeled Financial Crimes. George has been committing tax fraud for 15 years, using his victims' social security numbers to open credit accounts, forging documents to access their savings accounts. The IRS is very interested in these records. Marcus whistled low. How did you even get access to this information? I'm very good at my job, Amber said simply, and I have friends in useful places. The truth was more complex than that. Amber had spent years cultivating professional relationships specifically designed to help her destroy George. She had dated an IRS investigator for 8 months, learning everything she could about financial crimes prosecution. She had volunteered with a non-profit organization that helped domestic violence victims rebuild their credit, gaining access to databases that revealed the full scope of George's financial abuse. Every choice she had made since law school had been calculated to serve her ultimate purpose. There's something else, Marcus said, his expression troubled. We've been monitoring George since his release from Boston, and he's been in contact with a woman named Sarah Mitchell, divorced, 2 teenage sons, recently moved to Atlanta for a job with the CDC. Amber's jaw tightened. How long have they been seeing each other? 3 months. She's already moved in with him. Then we're running out of time. Amber turned to study the timeline on her wall, her mind racing through legal possibilities. Sarah Mitchell becomes victim number 9, or she becomes the prosecution's star witness. Either way, we move now. Amber, you can't just watch me. Sarah Mitchell was exactly George's type, intelligent but vulnerable, recently divorced and struggling to rebuild her life in a new city. At 42, she was beautiful in a quiet way that suggested she had once been confident before life wore her down. Amber found her at a Starbucks near the CDC, reading a medical journal while sipping a vanilla latte. The approach was subtle, natural. 2 professional women striking up a conversation about the challenges of relocating for work. I moved here from Boston about 6 years ago, Amber said, settling into the chair across from Sarah with her own coffee. The dating scene can be brutal when you don't know anyone. Tell me about it, Sarah laughed. Though I think I might have gotten lucky. I've been seeing someone for a few months and he's been incredibly supportive. That's wonderful. What does he do? He's in sales. George Thomas. He's this really charming guy who's helped me feel so much more settled here. Amber's heart rate spiked, but her expression remained perfectly neutral. That's great. It's so important to find someone who makes you feel safe. Exactly. After my divorce, I wasn't sure I'd ever trust anyone again, but George is so protective, so interested in taking care of me. The conversation continued for 45 minutes, with Amber carefully probing for information about George's behavior while establishing herself as a potential friend. By the time they exchanged phone numbers, she had learned that George was already exhibiting his classic pattern, isolating Sarah from her co-workers, managing her finances, expressing strong opinions about how she should interact with her teenage sons. Over the next 3 months, Amber cultivated the friendship carefully, meeting Sarah for coffee twice a week and occasionally joining her for lunch. She documented every conversation, every change in Sarah's demeanor, every incident that suggested George's behavior was escalating. He's been so stressed about work lately, Sarah confided during one of their meetings in November 2019. He lost his temper with Tyler last night over something stupid. Tyler left his backpack on the couch instead of putting it away. George grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him, which seemed like a pretty extreme reaction. That must have been frightening for Tyler, Amber said carefully. How did you handle it? I talked to George about it afterward and he apologized. He said he's been under a lot of pressure at work and that he didn't mean to lose control. He promised it wouldn't happen again. And do you believe him? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I want to, but there's something about the way he looked at Tyler in that moment. It reminded me of my ex-husband right before things got really bad. Amber reached across the table and squeezed Sarah's hand. Sarah, I need to tell you something. I work for the U.S. Attorney's Office as a federal prosecutor, specializing in domestic violence cases that cross state lines. What you just described, the escalation, the apologies, the promises to change, it's a textbook pattern. Are you saying you think George is abusive? I'm saying I think you should trust your instincts. And I'm saying that if you ever feel unsafe, you have someone who will believe you and help you. The revelation that her new friend was a prosecutor could have ended their relationship, but instead it seemed to give Sarah permission to acknowledge concerns she had been suppressing. Over the following months, she began sharing more troubling incidents, George monitoring her phone, criticizing her parenting, making increasingly violent threats when he was angry. In March 2020, George hit Sarah for the first time. "It was a slap," Sarah said when she called Amber from the hospital parking lot. "He said I embarrassed him at dinner by contradicting something he said in front of his friends. He apologized immediately, said he'd never done anything like that before, promised it would never happen again." "Sarah, where are you right now?" "At the emergency room. I told them I fell, but I think the nurse knew I was lying." "Stay right there. I'm coming to get you." Amber arrived at Grady Hospital within 20 minutes, accompanied by Detective Rodriguez and a victim's advocate from the U.S. Attorney's Office. By midnight, Sarah Mitchell had filed a federal complaint, obtained a restraining order, and moved into a safe house with her sons. More importantly for Amber's purposes, Sarah had agreed to wear a wire during any future contact with George. "I can't believe I let myself get involved with someone like this again," Sarah said as they sat in the safe house kitchen, reviewing the legal documents she had signed. "You didn't let anything happen," Amber replied firmly. "George Thomas is a predator who targets women in vulnerable situations. This isn't your fault. It's his choice, and now we're going to make sure he faces consequences for it." "Will this really stop him from hurting other people?" "Yes," Amber said with absolute certainty. "Because when I'm done building this case, George Thomas will never be free to hurt anyone again." The next 4 years were a masterclass in strategic prosecution. Amber used Sarah's case as the foundation for a federal investigation into George's pattern of domestic violence across multiple jurisdictions. She worked with FBI agents, IRS investigators, and prosecutors in 5 different states to build a comprehensive case that would ensure George faced federal charges carrying mandatory minimum sentences. The indictment, when it finally came in January 2024, was devastating in its scope. George Thomas was charged with 18 federal crimes, including interstate domestic violence, stalking across state lines, wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes against his victims. The defendant has spent nearly 3 decades systematically targeting vulnerable women, Amber told the media during the press conference announcing the charges. This indictment represents justice not just for his most recent victim, but for every woman whose life he has destroyed through violence, manipulation, and financial abuse. George's arrest was swift and dramatic. FBI agents took him into custody at his apartment while Sarah and her sons watched from an unmarked car across the street, their faces reflecting a mixture of fear and satisfaction. "How does it feel?" Detective Rodriguez asked Amber as they watched George being led away in handcuffs. "Like the beginning of the end," she replied. "Now comes the fun part." The trial was scheduled for July 2025, with Amber serving as lead federal prosecutor while working alongside FBI investigators who had helped build the interstate case. George's defense team, the best lawyers his remaining money could buy, had already indicated they would argue that he was the victim of a vindictive prosecutor with a personal vendetta. They weren't wrong about the personal vendetta, but they were wrong about its relevance to the case Amber had built. "Let them try to make this about me," she told her parents during a strategy session at their house. "Every piece of evidence I've collected is legally obtained, properly documented, and independently verifiable. George's guilt isn't a matter of opinion. It's a matter of public record spanning 26 years. As the trial date approached, Aretha marveled at the woman her daughter had become. At 29, Amber possessed a combination of legal brilliance, moral certainty, and personal drive that made her virtually unstoppable. She had transformed her childhood trauma into a weapon for justice that would protect countless other women. "Are you ready for this?" Caspian asked his daughter during one of their preparation sessions. "I've been ready for 26 years, Amber replied. "George Thomas destroyed my childhood, terrorized my mother, and spent decades hurting women across multiple states. Tomorrow, all of that ends. And after tomorrow? After tomorrow, I get to spend the rest of my career making sure men like him face consequences for their choices. But first, I get to look George Thomas in the eye and tell him exactly what I think of him." As July 2025 dawned bright and hot over Atlanta, 3 generations of women who had refused to be broken prepared to witness the final destruction of the man who had tried to destroy them. The reckoning was about to begin. Chapter 10. Forever Begins Now. July 2025. The garden had never looked more beautiful than it did on this perfect July evening, with 26 years of careful tending having transformed Aretha and Caspian's backyard into something that belonged in magazines, but felt like home. White lights twinkled in the ancient oak trees, casting dancing shadows across tables laden with Delilah's famous sweet potato pie recipes and flowers from every corner of Georgia. The magnolia tree Caspian had planted for their first anniversary now towered over the celebration, its glossy leaves whispering secrets to the warm summer breeze. "Mama, stop fussing with the flowers," 30-year-old Amber laughed, gently pulling Aretha away from the centerpiece she was adjusting for the 3rd time. "Everything is perfect. You taught me that perfection comes from love, not from moving roses 2 inches to the left." Aretha stepped back and surveyed the scene with the satisfaction of a woman who had learned to recognize happiness when she was living in it. Their 24th wedding anniversary party was exactly what she had dreamed of. Family and chosen family gathered together, multiple generations celebrating the love that had created them all. "You're right," she said, smoothing her pale blue dress, a far cry from the one George had hated so many years ago, but chosen with the same defiant joy. "I just want everything to be perfect," 28-year-old Evie finished, appearing beside them with her characteristic efficiency. "And it is perfect, Mama, because we're all here, we're all healthy, and we're all happy. What else could you possibly want? What else indeed?" Aretha looked around at the gathering and felt her heart swell with gratitude so profound it almost hurt. The twins, now 14 and impossibly tall, were regaling their great-aunt with stories about their upcoming freshman year of high school. Maverick planned to join the debate team and had already expressed interest in Amber's alma mater, while Magnolia was torn between art classes and advanced science, her interests as varied as her grandmother Delilah's had been. "They're going to be fine," Caspian said, appearing at Aretha's elbow with 2 glasses of champagne and the ability to read her thoughts that came from spending half a lifetime together. At 54, he was more handsome than ever, his hair silver at the temples and his blue eyes still capable of making her heart skip beats. "I know they are," Aretha replied, accepting the champagne and the kiss he pressed to her temple. "I just marvel sometimes at how different their childhood is from ours. They've never known fear, never doubted their worth, never questioned whether they're loved." "That's the point," said a familiar voice behind them. They turned to find Danny Murphy, now 60, and still the most honest mechanic in Atlanta, approaching with his wife and grandchildren in tow. "Y'all broke the cycle. These kids get to start from a place of safety instead of having to fight their way to it." As if summoned by the conversation about family legacies, Amber moved to the center of the garden and called for attention. "Before we eat all of Mrs. Patterson's famous fried chicken," she began, grinning at their elderly neighbor who had become family decades ago, I have some news to share. The garden fell quiet. 43 people ranging in age from 4 to 87 waiting to hear what Atlanta's youngest partner at a major law firm had to announce. "David and I are engaged," Amber said simply, her smile radiant as she held up her left hand to display a vintage emerald ring that had belonged to her fiancé's grandmother. "And before anyone asks, yes, we want Daddy to officiate the ceremony." The cheer that went up could probably be heard 3 blocks away. Caspian, who had gotten his ministerial license online years ago to perform wedding ceremonies for clients who had become friends, looked stunned and honored. "I've been waiting 30 years to walk you down the aisle," he said, pulling Amber into a bear hug that lifted her off her feet despite her professional stature. "Actually," Amber said when he set her down, "I was hoping both my parents would walk me down the aisle. Mama gave me life twice, once when I was born and once when she found the courage to leave my biological father. I can't imagine getting married without both of you by my side." Aretha felt tears spring to her eyes, the kind of happy tears that came from moments too perfect to be planned. "I would be honored, baby girl." As if not to be outdone by her older sister, Evie cleared her throat and stepped forward. "Well, since we're making announcements, Marcus and I are expecting our first baby in February." This time the cheer was accompanied by tears, hugs, and the immediate mobilization of the women in the family to start planning baby showers and nursery decorations. "A wedding and a great-grandchild," Mrs. Patterson said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief that had seen many such celebrations. Delilah would be beside herself with joy. As the evening wound down and guests began to drift toward their cars, calling out promises to see each other soon and thanks for a perfect party, the immediate family lingered in the garden. This was their sacred time when the public celebration gave way to private reflection. "Daddy, tell us the story again," Magnolia requested, settling onto the garden bench beneath the magnolia tree with the casual command of someone who had grown up knowing she was cherished. "Which story, Princess? How you and Mama met. How you knew you were going to love her forever." Caspian and Aretha exchanged a look full of shared memory and private amusement. Their children never tired of hearing the story of their parents' courtship, perhaps because it served as proof that fairy tales could happen to real people who were brave enough to believe in them. "Well," Caspian began, settling onto the bench beside his daughter while Aretha took her place on his other side. "It was a beautiful day in June 1999, and your mama was the most terrified and brave woman I had ever seen." As he told the familiar story, courthouse meeting, flower shop visits, Sunday picnics in the park, Aretha marveled at how their beginning had contained all the seeds of their forever. Even in those early days, when she was still learning to trust and he was still learning to hope again, they had been building toward this moment, this garden, this family that felt as natural as breathing. "The end," Maverick said when Caspian finished the story with their wedding day. "No," Aretha corrected gently, "not the end, the beginning. Every day we choose each other is a new beginning." Later, when the last child had been tucked into bed and the dishes were washed and put away, Aretha and Caspian found themselves alone in their garden, slow dancing to music only they could hear. 26 years, Caspian murmured against her hair. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like we've been together forever." "Both," Aretha said, her arms around his neck and her head on his shoulder. "It feels like both, because it's both. Every day with you feels new, but our love feels ancient, like it was always meant to be this way." They swayed beneath the stars, surrounded by roses and memories and the profound satisfaction of a life well lived. At 57 and 54, they were old enough to know how rare their happiness was and young enough to enjoy many more years of it. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met?" Aretha asked. "Never," Caspian replied without hesitation. We were always going to meet, maybe not in that courthouse, maybe not that day, but somewhere, somehow. Some things are just meant to be. Like what? Like you learning to trust again, like me learning that the heart can love more than once, like our children growing up safe and strong, like this moment, right here, right now. As if to underscore his words, a shooting star streaked across the July sky, there and gone in an instant, but beautiful enough to make them both gasp with wonder. Make a wish, Aretha whispered. I don't need to, Caspian replied, spinning her slowly in the moonlight. I'm living in my wish. She pulled back to look at his face. This man who had saved her from herself and taught her that love could be gentle, that protection didn't require possession, that families could be chosen and built and treasured. I love you, Caspian Michael Whitmore. Today, tomorrow, and for all the tomorrows after that. I love you too, Aretha Marie Whitmore, from that first day in the courthouse until the last breath I take. They kissed beneath the magnolia tree, surrounded by the garden they had grown together, secure in the knowledge that some love stories really do last forever. Not because they're perfect, but because they're tended with the same care, patience, and faith required to grow something beautiful from nothing but hope and hard work. In the distance, Atlanta's skyline glittered with promise, and closer to home, their children slept safely in beds they had never doubted would be there tomorrow. This was the life they had built together, not perfect, but perfectly theirs, rooted in choice and watered with the kind of love that only grows stronger with time. Forever had finally begun. Thanks for watching, and I love you.